You're listening to ResultsLeader.fm. Being a thought leader is easy. Getting results is hard. This show is for the results leader who lives and dies by their results. Here is your host and Chief Results Leader, Jonathan Rivera.
Welcome back, boys and girls, to another ResultsLeader.fm. I am so glad that you are joining me today, and I'm going to honor your time with another amazing interview. Today, I have a serial entrepreneur, a financial coach, screenwriter, and most importantly, a family man who will share some amazing stories, the ups, the downs, what he has learned in today's episode, Mr. Henry Daas. All right, Henry, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here. Are you ready to rock this thing?
I am ready to rock and roll.
He is ready, ladies and gentlemen. So let's give our listeners a fast win. What book or books have you given most as a gift?
It's not a business book. It's called The Book of Laughter and Forgetting by Milan Kundera, who is one of my favorite authors. He's post writer. Actually, last time I gave it to somebody, a friend of mine who was having a nervous breakdown and going into an institution. And that was my gift to him. Wow. The Book of Laughter and Forgetting. Great, great, great novel. But for a business book, One Up on Wall Street, Peter Lynch, money book from the legendary manager of Fidelity's Magellan.
Excellent. Two cool recommendations we've never had before. So thank you for that. And now let's jump into one of the favorite questions. We get right into it here, Henry. Tell me a story of how an apparent failure set you up for later success.
Wow. Well, I've had a whole ton of failures. I listed a lot of them in my book, my FQ Financial Intelligence book I wrote about money. One of the specific ones was when I had a business partner. Again, we're going down a dark alleyway here with people going into institutions, and a business partner who jumped off a perfectly good bridge on purpose and didn't survive the fall, but I think that was his intent, and left me holding a multi-million-dollar bag on these real estate projects that we were doing. And it was misery for probably 3 solid years until I kind of got my way out of it. And what it did was galvanize me in a couple different ways. Number one is I really started focusing on all the hidden risk in things. You know, I'd handled what I thought were the obvious risks, but I was blind to the hidden risks. So that really forced me to raise my game in that regard. So yeah, trying to find the silver lining in that black cloud, it was tough while I was in the maelstrom. But later on, when I had an opportunity to reflect, I said, I got to take the positives out of this thing, because otherwise the other options are just miserable, right?
So can you give us an example? I guess your partner leaving this earth is an example. Can you give us a couple more examples of hidden risk and how you kind of think through those?
Well, in this particular case, it was, I'll tell you specifically, this was a real estate transaction, and I was the guarantor on the note, but I didn't have any hard money in. I had raised the money elsewhere, but I didn't have any of my hard money in play as I had in previous deals. So I thought, oh, I'm super smart. I'm not risking any of my capital. But then after that happened and we discovered that he had stolen millions of dollars, and now we had no recourse because he was dead and his estate was insolvent because we weren't the only one he had stolen money from. I said, wow, if I had put hard money in and not guaranteed the note, at least my losses would have been fixed and it would have been done. But instead, my losses were potentially gigantic. And then multiple years of litigation, right? So that was a case where I fooled myself.
Wow. Let's talk about investments. What would you say is the most worthwhile investment you have ever made?
Well, I'm a stock trader. So I've been trading. I bought my first stock when I was 17 and I'm 62 now. That gives you an idea. And the funny thing is, you know, the big wins that I've had, and I've had quite a few. I just had one lately with a stock that I bought just a couple of months ago, and it's already doubled, right? But those pale by comparison to the times that you take even just a tiny loss. You know, it's pretty funny. The psychology, first chapter of my book was the psychology of money. You have to understand the pleasure pain principle. I say it takes a kilo of pleasure to equal a gram of pain, and it really does. The biggest win that I've ever had was marrying the right person. Probably another answer people haven't given you, but we've been married for 30 years. This will be our 31st. Same woman, right? Since 1991. That was, if we want to call it a very unromantical investment, that was the best investment that I ever made by far. There's not even a close second.
So I want to tell you that you are not the first one to say that. All right. We know who we're putting on the show. We met you guys. Number two, that's beautiful. 31 years. Congratulations. That is a beautiful thing, especially in today's society. Number three, I second that. Like, if you don't have that best investment next to you, how do you even get through life? So I'm with you, brother. I'm with you all the way on that. So let's talk about the last 5 years. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life?
I am a creature of habits. I like to live a structured life. One of the things I do, I've been doing it for more than 5 years, is my market homework in the morning. So this is something that was taught to me by a gentleman named Alex Elder. You can look him up online. He's a pretty famous trader, written a whole bunch of books on how to trade, and I consider him a personal friend and a mentor. And he taught me this ritual probably 10 years ago. And it's a whole set of metrics that I look at every morning before the market opens. You know, futures, gold, currencies, something esoteric called the Baltic Dry Index, sentiment. That structure allows me to start the day feeling prepared, right? And there's another piece of it is this sort of stoplight, right? You ask yourself 5 simple questions, and it'll tell you either green light, trade ahead, amber light, trade with caution, or red light, no trade. And when I get a red light, no trade, I don't trade, even if a trade lands on my lap and screams, trade me, trade me, trade me. I trust my instruments like any good pilot. And that is a habit that I had kind of gone back and forth with through most of my middle age, but now it's pretty cemented. Yeah, and I think it works.
You don't have to do this, but I'm curious, what are those 5 questions you ask yourself?
How are you feeling? How did you do in the market yesterday? What's your schedule like? What's your feel for the market? I'm missing the 5th one. That's in there somewhere. I could probably look it up. I've been doing it so often that it's like I don't even remember it. It's almost reflexive.
Yeah. Your program.
And Alex was trained as a psychiatrist, so he's a really big believer in the psychology of money and the psychology of markets, because let's face it, even with algorithmic traders, those algorithms were written by humans. So they have human bias in there, and humans are what drive the market in all different ways, not only stock markets, but, real estate and commodities. People are talking about inflation now. What's driving inflation? More buyers than sellers. Prices go up. Just how it works.
What are some bad recommendations you hear in your area of expertise?
I wrote about this in my book. Some clients of mine who were younger had recommended a book by a pretty prominent younger money guy writing a book to teach a certain generation of people. So I said, all right, great. I read it. My clients give me recommendations all the time, and I'll read it. And I read it, and the very first thing that he focused on was credit cards. And I thought, that's a really weird place to start. I use the analogy of golf because I'm a golfer. And I'm like, if I were going to teach you golf, I wouldn't start in a sand trap trying to teach you how to get out of a bunker. There's so many more things that I have to cover before we would ever get to that part of your game. That's like a fine element of your game. So I thought that was really odd. But then I thought about it and said, well, if this is for 20-somethings, I guess the first financial trouble that most 20-somethings, and I'm the proud father of 3 of them, is they max out their credit cards. So learning about interest rates, maybe it's not the dumbest place to start. It's more present in their mind. I don't know. My feeling was, we got to start with something a little more fundamental than just how to get out of your stupid credit card debt.
Wow. That's fascinating. We interrupt your regularly scheduled program for a public service announcement. We're going to get right back into this show, but I wanted to ask you a question. If you have been listening to the show for any amount of time and you've picked up even one single tip then I need your help. Get the word out. Tell people about resultsleader.fm. Share it on social media, share it on your email, share it anywhere. Hashtag resultsleaderfm. Now let's jump back into the interview. Let's move on to results. Why do results matter?
Well, I've often said that if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist, right? And results need to be measurable, right? People know about SMART goals, right? One of the M in SMART goals is measurable, right? People talk about KPIs and OKRs, objectives and key results, right? Businesses run on that. Set an objective, set a goal, search for the metrics that are going to allow you to evaluate whether the results were good, bad, or indifferent, and work accordingly. I was just reading an article this morning about COVID from a doctor talking about COVID and when does the COVID end? His one-word answer was never. You know, like the flu, it's going to be here forever. But he was criticizing the lack of OKRs or the sporadic way that they were enforced, right? Set a goal, measure, right? So as a perfect example, the goal could be number of positive cases. Until we reach that result, we don't change the protocols, right? We don't give up masks and distancing until we've achieved that goal for a sustained period of time, not just for a day, right? But for a sustainable period. Well, you know, our government and our country is utterly incapable of doing that, right? It was an abject failure. If it was a business and they were running it through COVID, it'd have been bankrupt months ago, would have been bankrupt last April, right? If you're going to look at this from the position of a business that is trying to achieve results, you've got to be able to measure things all the way through the process. And you've got to recognize when shit ain't working and pivot, right?
In the last 5 years, what new realization has helped you get better results for your clients?
Simplifying things. I'll tell another story. This happened at the very beginning of my coaching. I was talking to a client who was who was a millennial, and I used the word recalcitrant, right? Because I'm a voracious reader and I have a very expansive vocabulary, and I'm not afraid to use it. My wife makes fun of me. She calls me pedantic, which is showy about my knowledge. I'm like, well, there's no point having all these arrows in my quiver if I'm not going to let a couple of them fly. And so I used that word, and then I got this pregnant pause on the other side, and I thought, uh-oh, and he said, I don't know what that word means. So I learned a very valuable lesson that day. Don't talk down to people, but use a fifth grade vocabulary. Just do that. Don't muddy the waters by using words that are not commonly used, right? You know, we had a president for the last 4 years who used the vocabulary probably of a second grader. And the people who loved him for that. He never overcomplicated anything that he said. It was all very simple, so a 5-year-old could understand it. And there's a lot to be said for that.
Love it, man. So what area of your business would you like better results?
My Achilles heel is marketing. Kind of always has been. When I started my first business 30 years ago, I leveraged my personal networks. It was all word of mouth, but that's pre-internet. You're talking 1991, all right? Even when the internet was ramping up during the 90s, and then, you know, we lived through the whole dot bomb and all that stuff, still wasn't quite there. I pegged 2010 as the inflection point, the tipping point, let's say. Who was that? Gladwell, I guess, who wrote the book, The Tipping Point, which is actually a pretty good book. That was when broadband internet became ubiquitous, right? Another word I shouldn't use on a coaching call, right? It means not rare for those of you keeping score at home. Broadband became not rare in 2010, and that spawned a whole generation of location-independent businesses, digital nomads. Those are terms that people have probably heard. And think about how this pandemic would have worked if it was the 1980s. Just think about what a shit show that would have been. Right. But now, you know, I'm in Connecticut and we're doing a Zoom call and you're creating content and you didn't have to leave the comfort of your home, and neither did I. That's pretty miraculous. And if you don't have context for someone, as I sometimes call myself guy who lived before internet, you don't understand really how miraculous the world we live in today is.
Henry, what results are you most proud of?
I'd say, besides my wife and my 3 children that I had a tiny little bit to do with, but she's the one who carried them to term and breastfed them and did all that stuff while I just sort of stood by and watched and massaged her feet, right? That was my job. I'm really proud of the fact that I've made it, almost to what's called retirement age, even though I don't have any plan to retire. We've had our ups and downs, but all in all, I've really never lost my compass in terms of what's valuable and what's important in life, right? The goal was never to be a gazillionaire. And I've heard people say, there was a famous quote I heard from a guy at a conference, I don't want to be a millionaire, I want to be a billionaire. And I thought, $1 billion is 1,000 million. How about just being happy with like 1 million? There are people in this world that would give their eye teeth to have 1 million. There are people, tens of millions, who won't earn $1 million in their entire life. My father was one of them, right? He shared that with me when he turned 65. He said, I have made $365,000 in my entire life.
Holy cow.
Yeah. And yet he did perfectly fine. Roof over our head. We lived in middle-class suburbia of New Jersey. We got a new car every 10 years. Our neighbors got a new car every 3 years. My parents were not concerned with keeping up with the Joneses. I asked my mom why she didn't, and she said, because it's paid for, right? That was her attitude. But they were depression babies.
Yeah.
Again, scarcity mindset. I try to live in a more abundant mindset, but I'm relatively frugal, I would say. I don't live beyond my means, and that's important.
Any parting thoughts that you'd like to share with the results leaders who are listening to us right now?
Again, I like to circle back to the idea that it's tedious and it's boring to live a real structured life. But if you're running a business, you have to. You just can't leave it to the fates to determine where your business is going. I have a big talk that I do about control, and we learned this. I learned this when I was training to be a coach. There's very little in life that you will control. And you can waste a lot of time trying to control things that are completely out of your control. In fact, if you bring another human or another carbon-based life form into the mix, control goes out the window. You want to be able to influence things. And eventually, in coach speak, we move to the point of being vulnerable. And that's where you will finally realize what it is to be a kind of a fully formed human being, is when you can allow yourself to be vulnerable, when you can come on a podcast and talk about how you mess things up, right? Instead of just coming out here and puffing yourself up like you're the greatest thing since bread came sliced. We know better, right? There's a lot to be learned from both sides of the coin. Don't keep your blinders on. Don't start believing your own press clippings, right? That's an old saying. Keep it real, I guess.
I dig it, man. So I know our listeners are going to dig it too. Where can they learn more about you? Where can they get more Henry?
Well, you can go to henrydaas.com. That's my vanity site. That has all my links to all my business sites and my screenplays, because I've written 11 screenplays, and my baseball cards and my golf trips. If you go to Daas Knowledge, DAAS Knowledge, that's my main business site. That covers my entrepreneurial coaching, my finance coaching, my 20-week course in finance. Everything's there. I'd encourage you to sign up for my newsletter. I send out a newsletter. It's actually turned into at least once a week now, where I send out all sorts of stuff about financial news items and a little treatise I'm writing about income inequality right now. So, yeah, lots of good stuff.
All right. We will be sure to link to everything on the show notes. We've been talking to Mr. Henry Daas. Thank you for sharing your results with us. That is a wrap for another edition of ResultsLeader.fm. If you are out there getting results for your clients and you want to be featured on the show, go to resultsleader.fm now and apply to be on the show. And if you love what you're hearing, share the show, give us a rating and review, do anything to help us get the message out there. Thought leadership is easy, but results leadership is hard. We'll catch you on the next one.
This is the podcastfactory.com.